Hasan Piker is in serious trouble. Hasan Piker is facing real jail time in relation to the trip to Cuba. This is in relation to the Fed subpoenaing Piker along with Medea Benjamin over the Code Pink sponsored Cuba trip and potentially other foreign dealings that Piker has had. This is very serious in the sense that not only is a House Oversight Committee opening an inquiry into this, but the alleged potential crimes could be so severe that you'd see significant jail time for anyone involved in the foreign correspondence with Cuban government officials or the coordination of journalism related to Cuban politics. And I want to make it clear, Piker is not a sympathetic case in this, example. And before I get to that, I think we should probably go through a bit more of what's going on, but I'd like to give my opinion later in the video. What's actually interesting about this situation is that when Hasan Piker, through Code Pink and with a bunch of other influencers, took this humanitarian aid trip to Cuba earlier this year, there wasn't much on the surface that was interesting. It was just seen as a sort of PR op for people in the far left or third world camp of American politics to basically say, hey, look at what's going on in Cuba, this is bad, blah, blah. And to their credit, the sanctions on Cuba are severe, and they're seemingly partially without warrant. I'm not a proponent of the Cuban government or the way that the Cuban state has failed its people, but the approach from the Trump administration is less than ideal, to say the least. So I understand why there would be anger with Cuba, but the implications of the kind of people involved in this project were bad, in the sense that you can tell they were not there because they cared about some humanitarian goal or whatever, but it was another proxy to sort of signal how communism is better than capitalism and why America is evil, whatever, the whole, 9 yards. And there's nothing necessarily illegal about an American going to Cuba or even an American going to Cuba to do journalism. But there's a couple of caveats that make the situation interesting. The first is that you can go to Cuba, but you cannot work with the government for a couple of reasons. There's long-lasting sanctions related to the government that have been around for a long time. And then on top of that, the Trump administration added Cuba to the list of state sponsors of terrorism, perhaps somewhat erroneously, but it was added to that list, which significantly reduces the ways that you can interact with the government, especially when it comes to journalism. Now, there's a world where Piker did nothing wrong, and there's a world where he innocently was, involved with an organization that may have been doing either illegal things or coordination that was not above board, but he himself was, not communicating. However, let's look at this clip where you get an interesting view of what potentially happened with Piker on this trip. So this is prior to the trip, and it's on his podcast Fear and let's just see Hasan talk about this upcoming trip and how he was talking about it.
I want to go to Cuba. Would you be down?
I fucking love Cuba.
Oh yeah, you'd be down?
Yeah, I filmed a documentary there once.
The Cuban government actually hit my contact from the embassy and told him that if the only thing stopping us from coming to Cuba was the consistent internet access, we can make it happen.
Yeah, Cuba is sick.
Wait,
could-
the government reached out to you?
So yeah, of course. It's not reached out to me. There's there's a middleman there.
Okay.
Because I had a doctor from Cuba. Cuba does this thing called medical missions, and they've been doing it since I believe the 70s, and it's incredibly successful. They have a massive, very robust medical program because they have to. Because they're under an incredible sanctions regime by the United States of America that the rest of the world thinks is abhorrent, except for America and Israel that keep consistently vetoing it over and over again. But this has created a...
If Piker's description of this event is relatively accurate, then what he's describing is likely a FAR violation. With countries that are sanctioned this way, when you take any direction, this doesn't have to just go for sanctioned countries, but there are even more restrictions related to this, that when you're taking direction for propaganda from a foreign entity, especially if you're receiving compensation or even just direction, that is a crime if you don't declare it. Now, oftentimes you can just declare it and get away with it, but, you might ask, well, was Hasan actually doing propaganda for these people. And let's see what you think about this.
What's up, guys? This is Hasan Piker. Just got back from Cuba. We were on a humanitarian aid mission, and I saw firsthand the struggles of the Cuban population on the island. This is going through a massive energy crisis.
So I'll save you the whole video. It's worth watching. It's 9 minutes. But this is Hasan quickly after his trip going to Al Jazeera and doing a very tightly done sort of video essay style recounting of his trip in Cuba and highlighting on foreign policy topics related to what he thinks are unfair sanctions, as an example here.
And many others to discontinue the medical missions. They've sent back in Jamaica all of the Cuban doctors that were working there.
I'm very worried for the country. It's on
pressure.
So the thing is that, like, is it possible that he simply went there on his own volition, had no contact with government officials that were telling him what to do or what to say, or giving him even just basic direction on how to orient talking points, and then he received no funding, whatever? That's all possible. And then he came back and then just happened to do an Al Jazeera, story on it. That's 100% possible. And that is likely totally above board, as long as he wasn't doing other illegal things there. But as we saw with that clip earlier, it sounds like he was in contact with Cuban officials, and if it was with a middleman, it doesn't matter. That in itself will be in the realm of FARA violations or foreign espionage violations related to the sanctions on Cuba. It's kind of crazy. And Hasan's initial response after all this is to kind of go hard on the people involved, seemingly trying to put some distance between himself and the organization, specifically calling out Singham. Roy Singham is a billionaire sort of kind of cosmopolitan, currently lives in China, and he's a huge funding vehicle for pro-communist and, generally speaking, anti-American institutions that operate in the West, especially America. But what's fascinating about Piker's kind of focusing on Roy Singham's impetus in this trip and the insinuation that the Treasury Department or something, or that the DOJ is concerned with Singham, is that Singham has not ever been named. In fact, it goes as far as to say multiple articles have claimed that this is the first public acknowledgement from a figure inside any of these far-left social media networks that are alleging Singham and his network are operating with an explicitly political agenda with his funding mechanisms. Now, that's a really important thing in and of itself, because what he's referring to are these nonprofit funds, like a 501c, where Singham's funding vehicles are not meant to be openly partisan, in the sense that nonprofit funding vehicles are allowed to have a political edge, but it can't be the majority of where the money goes. It has to go to this common good sort of thing. So for someone like Hasan to say this publicly, again, even if it's just him talking, this puts an immense amount of pressure on the people around this space, and it leads you to think like, oh, maybe there was something a little more coordinated going on under the surface. And then, as you can see here, like as an example, now this guy is a little iffy, and so is his Bitcoin Policy Institute or whatever, but you can see in a lot of this stuff that if you dig deep on Singham's funding explicitly, but other CCP and China media funds, there is a significant amount of interplay with the American far left in this. Look at polling, look at elections. The reality is the vast majority of America does not get on board with this far left messaging, but there's a huge amount of media oriented around it. Bernie Sanders and AOC are two of the most talked about people in Congress, and they're some of the most electorally ineffective. Sanders himself is unique for how historically ineffective he is in terms of passing legislation, yet they occupy quite a lot of the media space, partially because of their controversies and sort of being these sort of wild cards or rebels in the political environment. But Also because there's a huge media apparatus behind them that is funded by foreign investors that is largely CCP oriented. And Piker is just a part of this. Here's the part of the video where I want to just go over my own opinion more so, which is that it's a complicated circumstance where the Trump admin has aggressively abused the DOJ, and they're not a trustworthy group of people. And any of these sort of investigations, especially even if they're cross department, they're not trustworthy. They're simply not. And you can't assume good intentions of the Trump admin because so much of their attempts at prosecution are political and completely useless, with no other purpose besides from intimidating their foes without good legal cause. However, this is where the right should step in. Again, we can't trust the Trump admin, but this cannot go on. The very fact that we've allowed so much subversion from foreign actors in a way to undermine not just American interests, but American foreign policy is perverse. It's insane. And it creates a miasma of confusion that destroys American politics. Part of politics that's important, at least in the democratic, Western American tradition, is that there's supposed to be this notion of proportional representation, this idea of, what you see at the national scale is representative. But the concern is that you're increasingly having the national scale Democratic Party lean very left on certain issues, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And then when you go to the local level, there's so much kind of asymmetry around. There's so much, there's a lack of putting two and two together. Think about a state like Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is this blue, but also red, so, inevitably purple state where it leans blue state level. But when you project the state politics of Pennsylvania nationally, well, it seems like it's almost a red state. When you describe Governor Josh Shapiro, he comes off like a Republican more than a Democrat in a lot of ways. And this isn't to say there's certain states that are uniquely progressive, like Vermont, where Sanders hails from, but the National Democratic Party and the places where the Democrats could be contesting seats are places that are further to the right significantly than the people like Piker. And it stings to know that there's a real chance that people like Hasan Piker are not acting just as, political activists in America, but are instead pseudo foreign agents potentially, or receiving foreign direction or foreign funds. That's something that the American people should know to make an informed decision. Our media should be transparent, and it cuts both ways. For example, Tenet Media, where Lauren Chen was funneling Russian funds to be able to do this extremely subversive funding of alternative right media to further Russian narratives. Those people should have their feet to the fire. Those people should be litigated aggressively. They should be investigated aggressively. And perhaps that's part of the problem with this situation, which is that the subpoenas around Piker and his Code Pink associates clearly seems to be purely partisan, purely retributive. It doesn't seem to be a good faith effort in trying to clean up American politics from foreign intervention. This is still the party that denies any Russian collusion, or at the very least Russian interference in the 2015, if not also the 2019-2020 elections. And that's important. That's huge, because it's not about a left-right thing even with this. But Piker shouldn't be seen oppositionally, or shouldn't be seen as a valid target because of just being a left-wing figure. It's because he represents something that is extremely toxic to the American project, which is the inability to disclose funding sources. It's not just about Hasan. It's just not just about like the left-leaning social media influencers. It's about cleaning up our politics from foreign interference, making it clear when someone is working on behalf of the government. Because here's the real irony, is that we are a free nation. We have carve-outs. We have FARA for a reason. We actually say, hey, if you want to be someone who is doing what is equivalent to foreign propaganda, if not literally a type of foreign propaganda. You can do that. You just have to do it through illicit means. And when you're not doing it through illicit means, it's because you don't want people to know. And that's the issue. So, it doesn't feel good to get behind this in terms of the Trump admin's, background, but in isolation, like, this is awesome. This is exactly what you want to see. If American political activists do questionable things with foreign policy and take questionable trips, there should be investigation. There should be interrogation of that. And yeah, so I'm pleased that Hasan is being put through what a lot of other people should. And I think that this should be a trend that is apolitical and long lasting, and hopefully can sort of, reorient both parties long term. Obviously, I don't think the Trump administration is going to continue this in any meaningful way at the right, but hopefully it outlines a blueprint for the Democrats when they eventually take power again, which is to, really try to flame or put to fire a lot of this foreign influence and bring it out in the public and let it become something that's known, litigated, and punished for. Make examples of it so influencers are afraid to do what Piker did in the worst case scenario. Again, he might be innocent, of course, but the way he's described things definitely sounds like there was some level of foreign interference that was illegal, at least just going by his own descriptions, his own accounting. And yeah, that's kind of the video. Agree, disagree, let me know. And thank you for watching, anyone who's at this point. And yeah, I'll see you in the video tomorrow. See you. Bye-bye.